Hey everybody, today we are debating Christianity versus atheism, and we're starting right now. Glad to have you here, everybody. Very excited as we have two gentlemen facing off for the first time. We have the man that has become, sorry I introduce you like this every time, Josh, notorious on Twitter for his trolling and barbaric methods. So we are happy to have Joshua Brister back, as well as TJump, who just had a big debate, and I'm sure he's going to have a lot of other future big debates, as both of these guys are skilled in debate and well-read. So with that, we're going to quick check out the upcoming debate this Monday. We are especially excited about, as for the first time, Kent Hovind and Dr. Cy Gart will face off in a debate on whether or not science and religion are at war. A lot of you have said, hey, we want a Christian to represent the old earth position. We've never had one. And so this is my hopeful answer to your request, for those of you who have asked for it, is that Cy Gart is a Christian and an old earth Christian, and he and Dr. Hovind are, or Kent Hovind, I know there's controversy over the fact that his, well, we'll talk about that another time, but Kent Hovind, Cy Gart, very exciting. Now, for today's debate, very pumped. The debaters' links are down in the description. See down there? See, like I go peek down there and see them and like almost grab down. So we're glad to have them here. You can check out their channels. And last, if you're new here, want to say, hey, hit that subscribe button. We'd love to have you back. We've got a lot of debates coming up, very exciting ones. And whether you're a Christian, atheist, we want to know, we're glad you're here. So it doesn't matter what side you're on or whether you're one of the many strange creatures in between. We just want intellectual, ideological diversity. And so having you could say, a mix of people that interact is, I think, good for us. We kind of learn new perspectives, and it keeps us sharp in terms of not getting into that group think where you have everybody just kind of agree with you. And moreover, I can't help but express my thankfulness for the debaters, as they share kind of the highlights of their reading, you could say. And so that's the hope, is that this channel will also kind of be about vicarious learning, where people get to hear the strongest arguments that people have distilled down from their hours and hours and hours of reading. And with that, we will introduce the debaters. So first is Joshua Brister, as mentioned, Mr. Notorious. Let's call him Mr. Incendiary. Josh, glad you're here. If you want to share what you've been up to at your channel, we will give you about 30 to 60 seconds to share what you've been up to, whether it be on your channel, Twitter, organization, blog, anything like that. I know you mentioned a paper that you might want me to share, so Josh, the floor is yours.
Well, first of all, you can call me the best if you want to call me anything at all. I did do a paper when I was being mentored by Dr. Gary Habermas. I did a paper on miracles and their plausibility. I worked with probability calculus and the historical method. You can check that out. It should be on the in one of the links. But I really appreciate being here. I thank you, and I thank Tom.
Radical. Thank you very much, Josh. And TJump, glad to have you back. And Tom, I got to tell you folks, Tom is always ready to jump into a debate. Doesn't matter what it is. He's like, oh yeah, I'll take it. So glad to have you here, Tom. And as mentioned, both of their links are in the description. Tom, what have you been up to at your channel?
Not much recently. I've just been sick, lazing around in bed mostly for the past like week and a half. So, but normally I do debates like these, so I enjoy them.
You bet. Well, we hope you feel better, and I'm sure that Tom's going to have many more debates on his channel, and so you can check that out. In fact, I think, Tom, is it fair to say you have like primarily almost all your videos are debates?
Usually they're conversations, not usually debates. I just do debates on your channel, so but they're close.
You bet. Yeah, you can say civil discourse. We use the word debate pretty loosely around here, so want you to know about that channel, as we really want you to just know about where all the debates are happening. Doesn't matter if they're on modern day debate or not, we're happy to have you here, but if you're on another channel, we want to let you know about it so you can check those out as well. Next, we're going to start this debate with a 12-minute opening statement from Joshua Brister. TJump is willing to do a very quick abbreviated opening. He doesn't really, basically, I screwed up. I didn't communicate well in terms of opening statements, and so Tom was kind of like, "Hey, I'll just improvise," because he my fault. He thought it was going to be a civil discourse where they just kind of jump into informal dialogue for the whole time, and so sorry about that. But Tom was a major team player, willing to do kind of a improvised opening statement that won't be quite 12 minutes, and so we're happy to have that. Then it's just right into the open discussion. By the way, Paul Quantum Whales, I think I recognize you, buddy. I saw that somebody banned you. One of our mods banned you. Really sorry. I don't know who it was, but I'm bringing the hammer down on the mods because I'm like, gosh, you guys, why do you freaking keep banning people? We don't, basically the rules here, I'll go over a couple of rules really quick because I always forget to. The only way that mods should ban anybody is if they like use explicit like hate speech. If they use like the N-word, yeah, ban them. But otherwise, you really shouldn't be banning or timing people out or deleting their messages unless it's hate speech. So with that, also want to mention, if you have a question during the debate, just put an @modern-day-debate in the comment section. That'll let me know that it's a question for one of the speakers, and that way I can scoop it out, put it into our list. And if you have a something more other than a question, like a comment from one of the debaters, we offer a super chat as well. So if you want to do super chat, you can fire it into there, and basically I'll see that, and we read super chats first. And as mentioned, super chats don't have to be questions, they can be comments. So with that, very excited. I am starting the timer. And Josh, if you want to go into full screen mode, I know that you had said you have, what's the word I'm looking for? You have a PowerPoint.
Yes.
So we are going to set up Josh's. It's coming. I'm pulling in the source. So we have Josh's PowerPoint being set up at the moment. And so basically, we're going to have, as mentioned, a 12-minute opening for Josh in which he shares this, and then we will have Tom give his opening. And Josh, you are set to go with your PowerPoint. So on your first word, I'll start the timer, Josh.
Man, writes Lorne Isley, is the cosmic orphan. He is the only creature in the universe who asks why. Other animals have instincts to guide them, but man has learned to ask questions. Who am I? He asks. Why am I here? Where am I going? Now, according to Aristotle, philosophy begins with a sense of wonder about the world. And the most profound question a man can ask concerns the very origin of the universe. Aristotle begins his metaphysics with a statement: all men by nature desire to know. An indication of this is the delight we take in our senses, for even apart from their usefulness, they are loved for themselves. And above all others, the sense of sight. We Christians study apologetics. We tackle false doctrines. We tackle false philosophy, as it says in the book of Colossians 2:8. See to it that no one takes you captive through hollow and deceptive philosophy, which depends on human tradition and the basic principles of the world rather than of Christ. This is the time we are taking this back. I want to mention a couple articles by a couple arguments by C.S. Lewis, a lived life type argument. Premise one: if we have needs and desires that this world can't answer or provide, then we probably aren't made for this world. Premise two: we have needs and desires that this world can't answer and provide. Premise three: we aren't made for this world. This was in Mere Christianity. In another of his books, Surprised by Joy, here's another argument. Premise one: every natural innate desire has an object that can fulfill it. Premise two: human beings have a natural innate desire for immortality. Therefore, premise three: there must be an immortal life after death. Alvin Plantinga, in many of his books, Warrant Christian Belief, God in Other Minds, he has argued that there are properly basic beliefs. Among these are the existence of God. We don't have to give any argument for the existence of God. God is a living reality to us, and so is other minds and our own existence, the external world. And by the way, a tiger defecating on Tom Jump's books. We could know that by the perception that they bring us. Like others, John Calvin, the sensus divinitatis, we have this written on our hearts and minds, where we know intuitively that God does exist. Time magazine wrote a provocative article in April 8th, 1966, in questioning whether God was dead. But just 14 years later, in Time magazine, on April 7, 1980, a remarkable change took place. Let me quote from the article. Is God coming back to life? In a quiet revolution in thought and argument that hardly anybody could ever see only 2 decades ago, God making a comeback. Most intriguingly, it is happening not among theologians or ordinary believers, but in the crisp intellectual cycle of academic philosophers, where the consensus has long banished the Almighty from fateful discourse. Quentin Smith has said similar things. Here's something from Quentin Smith. He said, God is not dead in academia. He returned to life in the late 1960s, and is now alive and well in his last academic stronghold, philosophy departments. Christian theism rises. I want to read another quote by Quentin Smith. Naturalism passively watched as realist versions of theism began to sweep through the philosophical community, until today perhaps 1/4 or 1/3 of philosophy professors are theists, with most being Orthodox Christians in philosophy. It became almost overnight academically respectable to argue for theism, making philosophy a favored field of entry for the most intellectual and talented theists entering academia today. There is a revolution going on, and I wonder if Tom is aware of it. Common sense strikes back. You could get a good look at a bad argument by sticking your head up a bull's ass, or you could just look at David Hume's word. You could just take David Hume's word for it. Now, I'm going to be discussing David Hume a lot during this presentation. Thomas Reid, a philosopher from the 18th century of common sense, the Scottish common sense philosophy. This is what he says. We see then that Mr. Hume's philosophy is very much like a hobby horse, which a man, when he is ill, can keep at home with him and ride to his contentment. But just in case he should bring it to the marketplace, his friends would quickly impanel a jury and confiscate his estates, and have the solicitude never to leave him alone again. This skepticism is unwarranted and unlivable, and we're going to see, here's a lot of books that go over this. Some from William James, some from Daniel Robinson. This is a quote from Bertrand Russell. Whoever wishes to become a philosopher must learn not to be frightened by absurdities. As you can see on this timeline, David Hume is concurrent with this Scottish Common Sense School with Thomas Reid. Thomas Reid thought things a lot differently than the skeptical Hume. Conjectures and theory of the creation of man, and will always be found unlike the creatures of God. If we would know the path of God, we must consult themselves with humility, without daring to add anything of ours to what they declare. A just interpretation of nature is the only sound and orthodox philosophy. Whatever we add to our own is apocryphal and has no authority. Here is his famous An Inquiry with the Human Mind, who David Hume read and could not answer. This is Thomas Reid's philosophy. As you can see, it's direct realism. We can know things in the external world by first-person perspective, by the introspective perspective. Reid's answer to Hume's skepticism and naturalistic arguments was to enumerate a set of principles of common sense which constitute the foundations of rational thought. For Reid, just as we can trust our cognitive abilities to reliably perceive our own innate thoughts and can comprehend our own mental capacities, we can also likewise trust our sensory perceptions to give us reliable information about the external world. Now, Reid and other skeptical philosophers had something called the ideal theory, which said the ideas are mere representations in the mind. We should not do that. The simplest explanation, Tom, is direct realism. Trusting our innate intuitions about causality. This is what David Hume said in 1754 to his friend John Stuart. But allow me to tell you that I never asserted so absurd a proposition as that anything might arise without a cause. I only maintain that our certainty of the falsehood of any of that proposition proceeds neither from intuition nor demonstration, but from another source. You see, in real life, he doesn't doubt causality. He doesn't doubt any of these things. Neither should you, Tom. J.M. Mackey, the famous atheist, he confessed, still, this causal principle has some plausibility in that it is constantly confirmed in our experience. He also used reasonably, used reasonably in interpreting our experience. That was in Mackey's famous The Miracle of Theism. There are a few different types of explanation. You know, I think you really need to pay attention here, Tom. Scientific explanations versus personal explanations. Just because we can give a scientific explanation of our mental thoughts, that doesn't mean we can't have a personal explanation. Just think of water boiling or a car not starting. Are we going to really explain that to somebody by talking in the realm of physics and in laws and what is happening at that level? Or are we going to simply say something is wrong with the car, or I put water on the kettle to boil a pot of tea? You see, there are different kinds of explanations, and you can't rule out a priori ahead of time any of these. If you do, you're having faith in something called meta-epistemological skepticism, which is it's a wrong track to take. If you leave open the very possibility that God could exist, you have to look at the evidence. Number two, right here, the universe requires an immaterial cause because all space, matter, and time came into existence at the Big Bang. You can't have a scientific explanation of the beginning of the universe. You can either have either an abstract object starting the universe or an unembodied mind. But here's the problem, Tom. Abstract objects don't stand in causal relationships. So you have to postulate as the best explanation an unembodied mind, even though you yourself may not have experienced it. It's the only option there.
Got a 1 minute warning.
This is what falsifies pantheism: necessity and sufficient conditions. The cause of the universe must also be personal. If a necessary and sufficient condition for the production of an effect are eternal, then why is not the effect eternal? How can all causal conditions sufficient for the production of the effect be changelessly existent, and yet the effect not also be existent along with the cause? How can the cause timelessly exist, but the effect be temporal? Here's the answer, Tom. Pantheism is false. God must be personal to bring about a temporal effect from a necessary state of sufficient and necessary conditions.
Time.
All conjecture, that's the simplest explanation. Thank you very much.
Next. So thank you very much for that, Josh. And now we will return to the dialogue mode. So very excited to move into Tom's opening as well. So appreciate that clear opening, Josh. And as always, we expect a clear opening from Tom. So we appreciate you both being here. And Tom, I will start the clock on your first word.
All right, I'm an atheist, by which I mean there is no reason, evidence, or argument that indicate the existence of a God. The reason we can show this is like if you have a box and you believe there is a rabbit in the box, and you claim that the argument or the evidence to indicate the rabbit is the fact that the box weighs 2 pounds. We can know this isn't evidence of a rabbit because it can equally be explained by many other things, like a coffee mug or a weight, or a lizard, or all these other things. So if any of the arguments presented to indicate the existence of God can work equally as well for a non-God alternative like pantheism, they're not evidence of the existence of God. So I would like to ask Joshua which one of his arguments he'd like to start with. Which argument do you think most refutes pantheism?
I think that one that I gave, the last one that I gave necessary and sufficient conditions when I was reading that last slide.
Okay, so the argument is that the Big Bang can't be caused by natural things. It has to be something spaceless, timeless, immaterial. Is that essentially it?
It has to be something personal for an effect to arise from a timeless and changeless state of affairs. Otherwise, there would never be an effect. If the cause is timeless and changeless, why isn't the effect timeless and changeless? Pantheism can't account for that.
Well, okay, we can't actually account for that. There is a theory in physics by Nima Arkani Hamad that space and time are emergent from a more natural fundamental property. He's an atheist, so we can't actually account for that in naturalism.
Is that the consensus, though, Tom?
Is that the consensus? No, it's hypothetical. It's a theory.
Well, I can give hypotheticals all day, Tom.
Right, so we can account for it. So it is possible to account for it. You can't just say it's impossible. So we have a physics theory in physics that's published and supported by academic journals that it is actually possible to support this with purely natural things. So you can't then argue that it can't be done.
Okay, granted. It's possible that the moon is made out of cheese, Tom, but it's not likely.
Just to make sure I'm not misunderstanding, Tom, you said that you're ready to go into open discussion?
Yeah, I'm ready to go.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Just checking. Okay, go ahead.
So most physicists are atheists, so they're actually...
Say you about what I...
Josh, you got to let Tom finish.
I think he was asking you a question, right?
Sorry.
Okay.
So my position, most physicists are atheists. So most physicists reject this idea that you need some kind of consciousness to create the universe. It's just not really an accepted position. Most physicists either go with like the multiverse, the cyclic universe, string theory. None of them go with, there's a very small percentage of physicists who go with the mind. So the consensus in physics is not the argument that you're going for. One way to argue, if you want to say that space and time couldn't come about from purely natural causes, well, we actually have physics theories that do exactly that. So the consensus is that your position is not correct and not supported.
Yeah, I don't think that's right. The consensus is that the universe began to exist. Now, it's the theist who has a ready explanation for why it began to exist. They've always said that God is the reason, the sufficient reason, or the cause behind the universe. I was actually going to use both arguments and a number of others if I would have got to them. So it seems like it is plausible that we can say that that the universe began to exist. Here's the atheist reply, from what I understand it. The atheist reply is it just arose by magic?
Well, no, it arose by other physics, because all of these physics theories, like the multiverse, the cyclic universe, Nima Arkani Hamad's model, all of those are just different combinations of the math used in principles, particles, and laws in physics. So they're all just different combinations of stuff in the field of physics. Whereas there's no physics principle for like a being or an all-powerful thing or a necessary thing. Those aren't physics. So all of these things I'm presenting have a basis in physics, whereas yours does not have a basis in physics.
Physics was put in at the initial cosmological singularity, and I have a plethora of quotes from Paul Davies, Vilenkin, the Borg Vilenkin, a number of others, Christopher Isham, the British physicist, so many that would say otherwise. They don't speculate on that.
So Stephen Hawking actually disproved the singularity hypothesis. He was actually the one that presented it in his doctoral thesis, and then he disproved it later.
We don't use imaginary time. He uses imaginary
That's a different theory.
Which makes sense, like the square root of -1, Tom.
That's a different theory. That's not related to his refutation of the singularity hypothesis. So that's a different thing.
Okay. Well, what's the consensus show? That there was a singularity. Do you concur?
No, no, that was refuted by Hawking.
No, no. In fact, in his new book on a brief, not a brief history of time, on the nature of space and time, he says now almost everybody believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang.
Yes, the consensus is that our universe had a beginning, but the beginning isn't the same thing as a singularity. That's not; those are two different things. A singularity is a focal point where all time and space are compressed into an exact single point of, I don't know, the singularity. And that part was disproved.
Have you?
So those are two different theories. The Big Bang and singularity are not the same.
Yeah, I know that you keep saying that, but it's not. Have you read a book by Big Bang Theism, Atheism, and Big Bang Cosmology by Quentin Smith and William Lane Craig? I think it came out.
I don't think so. One sec, I'm trying to find the Hawking quote where he specifically says that.
Quentin Smith says, at least if you're if you're an atheist, you must believe that the universe came from nothing and by nothing. That's Quentin Smith. He's one of the top atheist philosophers.
Well, I'd say he's wrong. I don't agree with his assertion.
All right.
So for my example, pantheism is just an eternal, necessary, all-powerful nature. So I can say that nature is eternal and our universe came as an expression of this eternal nature, kind of like the multiverse theory. Our universe can have a beginning, no problem, but there can still just be more eternal nature behind that. So the Big Bang only indicates that our universe has a beginning, not all time and space, our time and space.
Here's the argument that I gave against pantheism. Pantheism, hold on, let me ask you a question first. Do you believe that pantheism is all is God and God is all? Or what would the definition of pantheism be?
No, I'm going with naturalistic pantheism. So that's just nature is all, essentially. So I'm applying the godlike properties to it.
So nature has no agental powers. Would you concur with that?
Agent, yes. No, it does not have any agency or consciousness. I wasn't sure. Agental. Caught me off guard by that.
Yeah, so here's what I said. I specifically said this in my slide on causal explanations, 3 types, and the third one was necessary and sufficient conditions. The cause of the universe must be personal. And here's the argument. If the necessary and sufficient conditions of the for the production of the effect are eternal, then why is not the effect eternal? How can all the causal conditions be sufficient for the production of the effect be changelessly existent, and yet the effect not be existent along with the cause? And lastly, how can the cause timelessly exist, but the effect be temporal? And it seems if there is no agental powers or capacities from your pantheistic, naturalistic hypothesis, then you must go with a personal agent that wills an effect from eternity. Or you believe in magic. How does that not falsify pantheism?
Because I just don't accept pretty much anything you just said. I was having a hard time following that. So there can be an eternal part of nature we haven't discovered yet, and that eternal part of nature created the temporal part that we find now. So there, like you mentioned, Hawking's imaginary time. There can be different kinds of time. So the time and space that began that occupy our universe is only one kind of time and space. So there could be other kinds of time and space. So the fact that something has a temporal status isn't a problem.
Are you speculating and thus going against the consensus? Because it seems like it.
No. Again, the consensus in physics is not that you need a god or a mind or anything. This is just a minority position in the philosophy of religion. Most philosophers reject that. Most physicists reject that. The consensus is completely that you're wrong.
Well, I think you're trying to convince yourself of that, Tom. The physicists don't they're not theologians. I've talked to some of them. I talked to Valenkin also, and see if he concurred what Craig said about his quotations in his debate with Lawrence Krauss. I don't got any of those quotes, any of those emails with me, but he said, yeah, all the evidence we have is that the universe.
You cut out. You still there?
Did I just hit something, James?
I still hear you, but it's much more faint. So,
Okay.
I think, there you go. That's a little better.
I wanted to say one more thing, Tom. Occam's razor would say that we should not multiply causes beyond necessity, but have the right amount of causes to bring about the effect. The argument
Right.
that I gave,
I would agree with that.
You
I would
need,
agree with that, but I would say that if you're
some cause to bring the effect about. If the cause is eternally present, but the effect is temporal, then why is it temporal, Tom?
because the cause
Why isn't
created
the
time.
universe eternal?
Well, parts of the universe or parts of nature are eternal. But if you create time, like create a dimension of time that is going to have a temporal beginning, and everything in that space-time is going to be temporal. So it's like if you create a kind of time and put stuff into that kind of time, then it's going to have a temporal beginning. I mean, that's
Alright.
like the multiverse theory just says that the eternal inflation. It's the eternal inflation theory. So the inflation is eternal, even though our universe had a temporal beginning and is temporal. The eternal inflation is eternal. So there's not a problem with that in physics.
You're trying to explain away the absolute beginning of the universe by arguing for the multiverse. Now, that's not the simplest explanation because we don't have any evidence for these bubble universes, but we do have evidence of the beginning of our universe. So it
Right,
seems to
but
me
that-
that the consensus, that's what it seems to me.
Well, the consensus is, I'm pretty sure, on my side, since like 75% of philosophers are atheists and like 80% of physicists are, or something like that. But just to go with your point here, you said the simplest explanation. I agree, we should go with the simplest explanation. And an all-powerful being who can create infinitely many multiverses is infinitely less simple than just asserting the multiverse. So the multiverse would be simpler than a God hypothesis at this point.
But,
And that's
but
just
the
one of
evidence
as many.
that hits our. But Tom, the evidence that hits our perceptions from the direct realism that Thomas Reid was talking about is that we only experience one universe. The evidence points that there's only one universe. So it seems to me that you're using an ad hoc reasoning to postulate many universes because a single universe coming into being, it smacks you of theology. I think you're being theologically biased here.
Well, I'd kind